Pure Line Adamites were, according to the Urantia Book, the unmixed descendants of Adam and Eve. They were a pair of celestial beings called material sons, sent to Earth roughly 37,848 years before 1934 AD to biologically and spiritually uplift humanity. Their bodies radiated a faint violet-hued luminescence, earning them the name the Violet Race, the ninth human race to appear on Urantia, Earth. Over millennia, they grew from a small family of exiles into a population of 4.5 million by 19,000 BC, seeding their genetic and cultural inheritance into nearly every civilization on the planet through peaceful emigration, missionary work, and eventual blending with existing races. Their story, told across papers 73 through 78 of the Urantia Book, is one of cosmic ambition, tragic failure, and enduring legacy. Adam and Eve were not born on Earth. They were members of the senior core of material sons on Jerusem, the capital world of Earth's local system of inhabited planets called Satania. Jointly numbered 14,311 in that core, they belonged to the third physical series and had served for more than 15,000 years as directors of experimental energy laboratories, modifying living forms and teaching new arrivals. On Jerusem, they had already raised 100 children, 50 sons and 50 daughters. Their mission arose because Earth's evolutionary races had reached a biological plateau. A supervisor named Tabamantia inspected the planet and recommended that material sons be sent. The entire senior core of material sons volunteered, and Melchizedek examiners selected this particular Adam and Eve, partly because they had remained loyal during the devastating Lucifer rebellion that had already left Earth isolated and scarred. They were to serve as biological uplifters, multiplying their own superior race into the hundreds of thousands, then gradually interbreeding with humanity to elevate the species from within. The plan demanded patience. Build a pure line violet population of at least 500,000 to 1 million before any widespread amalgamation. They arrived via seraphic transport at high noon and were rematerialized over 10 days inside a stone temple at the center of a magnificent Garden of Eden, not in Mesopotamia, but on a long, narrow peninsula projecting westward from the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. A loyal servant named Van had supervised its construction for years. By Adam's arrival, the garden already boasted 12,000 miles of paved roads, thousands of miles of irrigation ditches, and over 5,000 brick buildings, though it was only 1/4 finished. A great river fed by 4 tributaries watered the peninsula, and encircling mountains gave it a mild, equable climate. At its heart stood the sacred temple of the Universal Father. They stood a little more than 8 feet tall, with blue eyes, fair complexions, and light hair ranging from yellow to red to brown. But their most striking feature was invisible to no one. Their bodies gave forth a shimmer of violet-hued light. This radiant glow, a consequence of their dual circulation system, sustained by both material food and direct absorption of light energy, is what gave the entire race its name. They typically wore clothing, which largely concealed the luminescence across their bodies, but the glow radiating from their heads remained visible, producing what the Urantia Book identifies as the origin of the traditional halo depicted around holy figures throughout religious art. Their physical senses were far superior to those of evolutionary humans. They could perceive midway creatures and angelic beings invisible to mortal eyes. They possessed a form of telepathy, communicating with their immediate children across distances of about 50 miles through delicate gas chambers near their brain structures. Their bodies were highly disease-resistant, and Eve experienced no pain in childbirth, a trait shared by her Pure Line descendants. Their skulls were dolichocephalic, long-headed, a skeletal type that persisted as a distinguishing marker for generations. Adam and Eve were designed to live indefinitely on Earth through access to the Tree of Life, a real Urantia origin shrub that had been maintained for over 150,000 years. Their children, however, did not inherit the dual nutrition system. They were designedly mortal, though long-lived, with each succeeding generation's lifespan gravitating closer to the human norm. After the default severed Adam and Eve from the Tree of Life, Adam himself lived 530 years before dying of old age. Eve died 19 years before him from a weakened heart. Life in the first garden was structured around education, worship, and agriculture. The seventh day was devoted entirely to spiritual life, mornings for physical improvement, noontime for worship at the Father's temple, afternoons for intellectual cultivation, and evenings for social fellowship, a pattern the Urantia Book identifies as the origin of Sabbath observance. Adam and Eve explicitly forbade worship of themselves, insisting all devotion be directed toward the universal Father. Children were educated in schools modeled on Jerusem methods until age 16, then transferred to practical schools on the garden's western end until age 20. The curriculum covered 7 subjects: health and bodily care, the golden rule as a social standard, individual versus group rights, the history of Earth's races, trade improvement, emotional coordination, and the cultivation of play and humor. Younger children rotated activities every 30 minutes, older students every hour. Adam organized the Edomites into companies of 100, established nearly 100 outlying trade and social centers, and introduced the concept of representative government and diplomatic ambassadors between tribes. Adam and Eve's household was vegetarian. They themselves ate once daily, fruits, nuts, and cereals, and additionally absorbed energy directly from light. Their first generation ate no flesh whatsoever, subsisting entirely on the fruits of the trees. Later generations incorporated dairy products, though many continued plant-based diets. Eve nourished children with nut milks and fruit juices after weaning them at 1 year. Before the default, Eve bore 63 children, 32 daughters and 31 sons. By the time the family left the garden, 4 generations of Pure Line descendants numbered 1,647 individuals. The firstborn, Adamson, and the second son, Eveson, became the pillars of Adamite civilization. Average betrothal age was 18, with marriage permitted at 20. After more than a century of effort, progress was agonizingly slow. The world's evolutionary races were fragmented across hundreds of dialects, morally undeveloped, and scattered across vast distances. Caligastia, the deposed but still active planetary prince who had joined the Lucifer rebellion, worked ceaselessly to undermine the mission. Unable to influence Adam directly, he targeted Eve through an unwitting intermediary, Mesopotamia, a brilliant and sincere Nodite leader who had become one of Adam's most trusted lieutenants. Over 5 years of secret planning, Mesopotamia convinced Eve that mating with the Nodite leader Kano would produce a mixed-heritage child capable of immediately bridging the Violet and Nodite peoples, accelerating the mission by centuries. One autumn twilight, Eve consented. This act, pursuing a righteous end through unauthorized means, constituted the Adamic default, a departure from the divine plan. When Adam learned what had happened, he deliberately committed the same transgression with the Nodite woman Lauta, choosing to share Eve's fate rather than face an eternity without her. The seraphim Salonia, the narrator of these papers and literally the voice in the garden, reproved them both. Gabriel pronounced formal judgment. Adam and Eve were stripped of their immortal status and reduced to mortal standing. The consequences were immediate and violent. Kano was killed when garden dwellers swept out and destroyed the nearby Nodite settlement. Mesopotamia drowned himself. Eve bore Cain, fathered by Kano, and Adam fathered Sansa by Lauta, who died in childbirth. Faced with a Nodite army marching on the garden, Adam chose to leave peacefully. seraphic transports carried children under 20 to the constellation capital of Urantia. Adam, Eve, and 1,200 loyal followers departed eastward. The caravan journeyed for nearly a full year to reach a triangle of land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Mesopotamia, one of the original 3 candidate sites for the garden. There, a defense wall of 56 miles was constructed across the northern approach. Unlike the first garden, everything here had to be built from scratch, by the labor of their own hands and in the sweat of their faces. Adam devoted his remaining centuries to training his descendants in civil administration, education, and religious devotion. His son Evesen became his chief administrator. Evesen's eldest son, Jansad, succeeded Adam as head of the Adamite tribes. The religious lineage passed through Seth, the eldest surviving son, born in the second garden, 129 years after Adam's arrival, whose son Enos founded a new order of worship, and whose grandson Kenan launched the first foreign missionary service to surrounding tribes, establishing a Sethite priesthood that combined religion, healthcare, and education. The Adamites produced a third alphabet, pioneered metalworking, pottery, and weaving, and laid the foundations of art, science, and literature that would ripple outward for millennia. The Second Eden became the cradle of civilization for almost 30,000 years. Before Adam's death, he took one last extraordinary step. Eve was made head of a commission of 12 charged with race improvement, which selected 1,682 women of the highest type on Earth to be impregnated with Adamic life plasm. Of the resulting children, 1,570 survived to maturity, the earliest seeds of a new blended people. By 19,000 BC, the Adamites numbered 4.5 million and had already sent millions of their progeny outward as teachers, traders, and settlers. The purer strains maintained a deep tradition of peace-seeking. When population pressures mounted, they sent their finest sons and daughters as emissaries rather than as conquerors. Around the periphery of the second garden, where diminishing concentrations of violet blood blended with nodite and evolutionary peoples, a new race emerged, the Andites. Carrying roughly 1/8 to 1/6 Adamic inheritance, the Andites combined the intellectual and spiritual gifts of the violet race with the vigor and belligerence of the nodites. The Urantia Book calls them the best all-round human stock to appear on Urantia since the days of the Pure Line Violet peoples. They were, critically, not Aryan but pre-Aryan, not white but pre-white. Neither Occidental nor Oriental, but a blended foundation from which later racial categories would develop. The Andite migrations reshaped the planet over 15,000 years. The major waves moved northward around the Caspian Sea and then westward into Europe, where they merged with the indigenous blue race to form the foundation of what the Urantia Book calls the Nordic peoples, forefathers of the Scandinavian, Germanic, and Anglo-Saxon populations. 7 distinct Andite invasions of Europe are recorded, the last arriving on horseback in the 6th and 7th millennia BC. Eastward, Andites penetrated India as the Dravidian and later Aryan conquerors, making India the only location where all of Urantia's races eventually blended. They entered China via the Tibetan highlands and the Ti-Tao Pass, strengthening northern Chinese civilization, which the Urantia Book identifies as hosting the highest mass civilization on Urantia, between 25,000 and 5,000 BC. A remarkable group of 132 Andites embarked from Japan in small boats, crossed the Pacific via Polynesian islands, and reached South America, where they became ancestors of the Inca ruling lineage. Easter Island served as a religious center for one of these lost Pacific groups. In the homeland, the last Andites in Mesopotamia became the Sumerians, explaining the apparently sudden appearance of their advanced civilization, complete with temples, metalworking, writing, and complex law. By 2500 BC, the Sumerians were absorbed into northern Semitic peoples, and the Mesopotamian Andites passed from the pages of history. Along the Nile, Andite artisans brought metalworking and stone architecture. The Urantia Book credits the Andite genius Imhotep with constructing Egypt's first and most exquisite stone pyramid. The Urantia Book presents the Adamic mission as a partial failure that nonetheless enormously upstepped humanity. The narrator insists there was no fall of man, only a tragic shortcut that truncated a grander plan. Modern humans, even the northern European populations with the highest concentrations, carry far less than 1/8 violet blood, yet the Adamic contribution persists in 4 interwoven strands that compose the most advanced human stocks: Andinite, Sangic, Nodite, and Adamic. The cultural legacy runs deeper than genetics. The concept of the Sabbath, the halo in religious art, monotheistic worship, representative government, diplomatic exchange, formal education systems, the cultivation of humor and play, agricultural science, metalworking, alphabetic writing, and the missionary impulse. The Urantia Book traces all of these, in some measure, to the civilization that began with 2 8-foot-tall beings who stepped out of seraphic transport into a Mediterranean garden nearly 40,000 years ago, failed spectacularly, picked themselves up, walked to Mesopotamia, and spent the rest of their mortal lives trying to give humanity everything they had left to give. The violet shimmer faded, the inheritance endured.